first of all, I want to say to everybody, we've got a visitor, and it's extremely, really nice of Bester Cram to join us. He went to Bronx High School with Bob, as well as with Hufnagel and Harry Tether. And Bester, I could talk about as long as Bob. He is a very accomplished artist and filmmaker in his own right. So we're privileged to have him with us tonight. Thanks for joining us, Bester.
Thanks very much for having me. Great to be with you.
Hi, Bester. I haven't seen you since high school.
That's absolutely correct, Bob. And I haven't seen you either, but I've seen you in print.
Oh, and I've seen you online on talking about your movies. So congratulations.
Okay, so we're going to start. And as you know, except for Bester, I'm Larry Ricketts, and I am very excited to be moderating another 67 Zoom Connects. As I have told many of you, privately and publicly, renewed connections are great. However, new connections with former classmates are wonderful and special. My new connection with Robert Plunket came as it did with many of you. All of a sudden, there was our classmate, Bob Plunket, featured in the New York Times and the New Yorker. My search for Warren Harding, Bob's novel, had received national and international acclaim. I picked up the phone and called Bob. I found his phone number by a Google White Pages search. In spite of the deluge of national literary interest, Bob did pick up the phone and was gracious enough to tell me that he would love to chat with classmates via Zoom. So Robert and fellow classmates, here we are. As you all have read in the short bio provided for this session, Bob left Williams and got a theater degree from Sarah Lawrence. Bob had received the Hutchinson Fellowship from Williams. It is a grant to support continued work in the creative and performing arts. In spite of a leg up and great talent, Bob struggled to make a living as an actor and writer. East Coast, West Coast, and finally to Florida, where he found a unique niche as Mr. Chatterbox. It is useless for me to try and convey the fascinating story of Bob Plunket in an expanded bio. I would never be able to capture Bob's wit, sarcasm, charm, and most importantly, his ability to capture the human condition. Let's just chat, Bob. I will start the conversation with some questions. Harry Tether and John Hufnagel will join me with a couple of lightning round questions that we got from the New York Times, and then we will open up the conversation to all of you. Bob is a true raconteur, so Bob has asked me to make sure to keep us on time so the classmates will have 30 minutes to ask questions. So Bob, let's just start out by telling your classmates anything you think would be interesting about your life at Williams and a little bit about your life afterwards.
Okay. Not to start on a down note, but I do find this kind of interesting, and it's something I've realized over the years, which is that Williams was not the right school for me. And even though I enjoyed it socially and made friends and learned a lot, either I didn't know how to take advantage of what it had to offer, or it didn't have to offer what I needed. And what I needed was education as an artist. And maybe they're very good at it now, but back in those days, I mean, it was just not an art school. And they taught you to appreciate art, and they taught you, you know, the rules of literature and stuff like that. But there was no real hands-on art stuff going on, or very, very little. So, and I did have this, you know, minor talent for writing. I knew that, and the professors encouraged me. But when I got out of college, I felt a little lost. And the summer I got out of college, I did summer stock. Now, does anybody remember Bill Henderson? Yes. Okay.
Yes, yes.
and I have no idea what happened to Bill. Maybe someone else does, but he was a theatrical director, and he put on, somebody hired him to do a summer stock company in upstate New York. And he asked a couple of his friends from Williams, me included, to do it. And some of the other guys were Burt Cohen, remember Burt Cohen? And David Strathern, who was, I think, a year behind us,
Right.
who went on to become a famous movie star.
Yeah.
And so we went up to upstate New York, and I was sort of immersed in theater. And the girls he hired were all from Sarah Lawrence. And that, when the summer ended, I moved to New York and was trying to write, and it was impossible because I didn't know what I was doing. And they, at Sarah Lawrence, they needed boys because it was just a girls' school back in those days, and they would pay you $200 to be in a play. So I started being in the plays, and I made like about $800 over 2 years. And I was, driving a cab, working as a waiter in a restaurant, that kind of stuff. But Sarah Lawrence is very, now apparently it's run by a sex cult. I'm sure you've been reading that in the paper. But back in those days, the sex cult had not begun yet. I don't know why, but it was sort of a pipeline from the theater department at Sarah Lawrence right to the avant-garde New York off-Broadway theater world. So I got involved in that. And that's where I learned how to do it. Now, exactly what it is that I learned how to do, I'm not quite sure, but I basically learned how to create art. And I worked with incredible people. They're all dead and gone now, or you have never heard of them. But a couple of them, became very well-known artists, like Harvey Fierstein, and Richard Gere, who was not really from that world, but he did start in that world. And we actually did a low-budget film together back in 1970, I think. But the amazing thing about it was that I got to know people like, okay, you know that Lou Reed song, "Walk on the Wild Side"?
Yes.
And he talks about Candy Darling and Little Joe and Jackie Curtis. I got to know those people and work with them, and they were an extraordinary bunch of artists, very avant-garde, very gender fluid, and very, I feel, kind of damaged personalities, so damaged that the only thing they could do was perform off Broadway. But they were amazing personalities, and they worked with Andy Warhol, who I also got to know, and it was a incredibly exciting way to live. And we did plays in the basement, and it was I kind of learned how to do it. Now you wonder, well, but you write novels, you don't write plays. But both novels I've written are first person, and they're long comic monologues. So, a rather flamboyant personality telling a long story, that's what I learned how to do from being in the theater. And it was absolutely terrific. I had a wonderful time. This was New York in the early 70s, which is when New York was supposed to be at its nadir. It was broke, the city was filthy. And to me, it was the most wonderful place in the world. I thought that's what it was supposed to be like. Now, the only problem with being an avant-garde actor is that you don't make any money. So I decided to go back to business school. So then I moved to Los Angeles and went to UCLA.
As we talk, Bob, I can't see you in business school, but that's all right. Go ahead.
Well, you should go to UCLA. It's amazing because back in those days, you paid $400 a quarter, You did not have to go to class. All you had to do was pass the test. If you've been to Williams, it was so easy. It was the easiest thing imaginable. So you pay your $400. I had a full-time job when I was going to business school. And I ended up with this business degree. So then I went to, I got a job back in New York. I worked for the New York State Council on the Arts, which is the government funding office that funds the arts. My boss was Kitty Carlisle, who was a wonderful person to work for. And I thought I was going to be a state bureaucrat for the rest of my life. It was a great job because we funded all the arts groups. And I was getting a little worried because I thought, you know, I'm destined for better things. You know, I went to Williams. I shouldn't be sitting behind a desk making $15,000 a year. That's just not right. I'm too good. I'm too important. I'm too talented. And I was the only person who thought that. But I would one of my jobs was to write financial reports based on arts organizations in New York. And I noticed that in the council meetings, people would be reading my financial reports about the Metropolitan Opera, and they would giggle, and they giggle a lot. And I thought, maybe I'm onto something. You know, if my financial reports make people giggle, maybe I should like write a novel. So I quit my job and I wrote a novel. So that's how it started.
And then you moved down to Florida.
Eventually, I did move down to Florida.
Yeah.
But first, I had to teach myself how to write a novel.
Well, so let me ask that to keep us going. You know, we've learned about your inspiration, you know, from my search for Harding, from James's aspirin papers and your intrigue of Harding's life. But what was your final inspiration and motivation to take those fascinations and write?
It was a now or never situation. You know, I was in my mid-30s, and when young men are in their mid-30s, at least in my case, you start to look on your life and say, you know, is this what I want? I've got to do something important before 40. You know, that feeling. And I decided that if I can make them giggle with the financial reports, I'll make them giggle with the novel. And I was obsessed with Warren Harding for some reason, because I picked up a book about him in a thrift store, and it was fascinating. He was like the Trump of his day. It was one scandal after another. He was a womanizer. He wasn't really a crook, but he was a very colorful, long-winded personality. And nobody really knew very much about him. I mean, he was as presidents go, he was pretty ignored. And of course, the aspirin papers started back at Williams. Charles Samuels taught it my senior year in the American literature class, and I loved it ever since the first time I read it at Williams. And it's about this guy who tracks down the love letters of a dead poet, and they are in the property of the dead poet's mistress, who is a very, very old woman. And in Warren Harding, there was a very similar situation in that he had a young mistress, and he died in office in 1923. And she didn't get any money from him, and had one of his daughters, illegitimate daughter. So to get back at him, she wrote a book called The President's Daughter about their scandalous love affair, and it was a bestseller back in the 1920s. So all these things kind of coalesced in my mind, and I decided that's what I'll write. And I quit my job. Back in those days, when you quit a job and you had the right employer, you could get unemployment. So I was on unemployment, and I went to the main reading room of the New York Public Library every day and taught myself how to write a novel.
Did you set a deadline Bob,
No.
what was the tenacity to complete the novel? I'm always fascinated by that. Many of us have tried to start and have stopped. Many on the screen have actually finished, but how did you finish?
I finished because I was incredibly lucky. I had a good idea, and it worked. You know, it was that. Believe me, I know the feeling. I've started many novels, and you get to like page or chapter 3, and you realize that you don't know what you're doing. But this one was, there was a lot of intuition involved because I've been a big reader all my life, and it kind of fell into place. Plus, I cheated a lot. I mean, I figured out how to write a novel the wrong way, and I'll be glad to tell you how to do it because it really, really worked for me. And okay, I'll tell you how to write a novel. First of all, don't bother developing a plot. Use a plot that already exists. You're not going to come up with a new plot. They say that there are only 12 plots in the entire world. But, you know, this is ridiculous. There are actually 36 plots in the entire world. So pick one of them. And I was so stupid and so naive that I decided I'll do the aspirin papers and I'll just paraphrase the whole thing with different characters and different locations. And I started doing that. If you look at it very carefully, you'll see that I really did in the first chapter, the aspirin papers in a slightly different wording. And then step number 2, so you steal a plot. Developing characters is very, very tricky, and I've never been particularly good at it. So what you do is you use your friends, but you use this little piece of that friend and this little piece of that friend, and then you put together a new character. And if the only problem is you kind of have to disguise it a little because your friends will realize that they're in your book, and some of them don't like it. In Warren Harding, there's a fat girl, and she was my secretary at the New York City Council, and I felt a little guilty because, you know, I wasn't sure whether I was doing the right thing, and my editors, I told my editor, you know, maybe I should change it a little and tone it down a little because it's like I'm making fun of my secretary. And he said, that's what secretaries are for. Now, that'll give you an indication of the way the publishing world works.
Yeah.
It's a pretty brutal place. So you take your use your friends as characters, but then you have to find a voice. And I was writing the first person, so the voice is a little bit easier. But this is the very trickiest part because, you know, the voice tells you what is going on and shows you what is going on. The way you do this is you figure out somebody who really thinks you are a delightful person and loves to hear from you, your best friend, sort of. And this is, in literary terms, this is called your ideal reader. And then you write a letter to your ideal reader. It's that simple. That's all you do. And believe it or not, it worked. And that's how the novel got written. Now, I feel a little, you know, that's like telling people how the sausage is made. Nobody should ever know that. You know, it's like trade secrets. And if you realize that it's that, there's that much, I don't know what the word is. It's not thievery, but that's pretty close. It's not agonizing over profundities. You know, it's getting down there and making each paragraph work and having the story advance. And
well, you lead right.
It works.
You lead right into my next question. So, given how you've described this, I was about to run upstairs and just finish this and not talk anymore and go write, but Were you surprised at all then at the rave acceptance after the second publishing? Was it shocking, or did you expect it?
The first time the book came out, a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people did like it, but a lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was very mean-spirited. And now, 40 years later, it turns out that it's not mean-spirited, it's politically incorrect, which back in those days really didn't exist. And they're afraid of political incorrectness, but they're kind of drawn to it at the same time because it's like forbidden and kind of nasty to even think about such things. So the world changed a little in that regard. And the big difference was the gay overtones in the book. The narrator is closeted, and in the first time it came out, no one picked up on this. Absolutely no one. And it's the key to the book. The second time it came out, people's attitudes toward homosexuality became infinitely more sophisticated. And the second time it came out, people saw that this was the key to the book. This is what the book was about. And so it's like, now they got it, but it took 40 years.
But before we move on to other questions, would you do us a favor? Do you have a passage that you can read from the book that you think we'd enjoy?
Yeah, I'll read you a little passage. And I was thinking, I think that probably a lot of us, aside from me, went to graduate school in one shape or form or other. And so did the hero of the book. And this is the hero's musings on his life before he went to graduate school and why he did it. And okay, his girlfriend's name is Pam. She's kind of the beard, that kind of girlfriend. Pam has a lot of friends, but they are all in the business end of the arts or in one of the helping professions, i.e. social work. And to be brutally honest, they're a pretty dreary bunch of people. Overeducated, bitter about their take-home pay, trapped in Manhattan without cars, deprived of the profit motive in their dull but harried jobs, too timid to take charge of their lives, but too intelligent to be satisfied with the little they have. I should know I was one of them, until I decided it was now or never and went back to school. I didn't want to wake up one morning, 45 years old, and still be working for a zoo, for Christ's sake. My idea of a good time was no longer a wine and cheese party on 110th Street. Columbia seemed glad to get me, almost too glad. And after I got there, I figured out why. What a bunch of scholastic turkeys were my 50 or so fellow graduate students in history. Only one of them appeared to be any kind of threat, a sickly Jew from Chicago known as the Nose, who had won a famous scholarship for developing computer models to predict the future course of historical events. His theory was that all you had to do was identify all the variables, economic, political, religious, all the way down to the changes in the weather and the availability of contraceptives, and presto, you could tell what was going to happen whenever a foreign crisis reared its head. The simplest model, proven to have an astonishing 87% rate of accuracy, has over 5,000 variables. The system is called proto-history, and it's extremely controversial. Fortunately for me, this poor visionary was nearly always in the infirmary. So, a lot of that, I mentioned stealing, from other writers, and a lot of that comes from a book called The Red and the Black by Stendhal. Americans pay no attention to French literature, and that's so stupid because it's so good. It's really even as good as English literature. And The Red and the Black is like the world's first psychological novel, and it's about the young guy who goes to Paris to make his fortune, and he ends up in a school, and I just stole the whole thing from that. So it just goes to show you can find inspiration from the most unlikely sources that are applicable today. So
Bob, believe it or not, we're right on time. This is unbelievable. We did not rehearse this. Mr. Plunket and I knows if both of us started chatting, we may go on all night. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn to what we call a little New York Times questions that ask some great writers. And Bob has not prepared for this. These are top of the mind, sort of quick questions to be answered in a quick fashion. And John Huffnagel has got the first two to ask.
Okay, Bob, one of the first questions I have, other than my search for Warren Harding, what's the last great book that you read?
My other novel, which I happen to have a copy of right here, it's called Love Junkie. And this is coming out again in May. So so you can look forward to that. And we've just decided on the blurb for the cover of Love Junkie, the new edition. And it's a quote from Madonna. It's Madonna's favorite book, believe it or not. And she calls it brilliant but depressing. So that's Love Junkie.
And it was about our hometown too.
Yes, it's all about Bronxville. It's all about Bronxville.
Okay. And the other one is, which writer, novelist, playwright, critic, journalist, poet working today do you admire the most?
The answer is very strange, because I don't know if you would see him or her in that category, but it's and he just died, and it's Dame Edna. And Dame Edna did write several books. I mean, you all know who she is, or was, right? Mm-hmm. You know, Barry Humphries, who was an Australian comedian and satirist. And I see what she does, and to me, in my mind, it's exactly what I do. It's this overpowering personality who's really not that smart, but is totally convinced of his or her own attractiveness, who has gender issues that she plays back and forth with, and who is a narcissistic fool, but still a great character. So even though, you know, that's not what you would consider a famous writer, Dame Edna definitely. But by the way, Dame Edna and I developed a little pen pal friendship at one point, and I still have her letters, which are hilarious. and I would start getting letters from Barry Humphries saying, "Pay no attention to Dame Edna; she's an idiot." So,
Harry, you have questions next?
Great to see you, Bob.
Hi, Harry.
What is a great book or author that you have yet to read?
You know, I really, I'm thinking hard. Everybody that I want to have read, I have. I'm trying to figure out who I am saving for my old age. And I would probably go back to Jane Austen, oddly enough. You know, I've you know, read a couple of pages, but everybody, you know, people who write the kind of books I write, everybody says that they're descended from Jane Austen, and I want to see what I'm descended from, and I really have not read her very much. So big Jane Austen.
Okay. Now, taking you back a little bit to Sarasota and Mr. Chatterbox, who are the three people, living or dead, that you would most like to have at a dinner party with you?
John O'Hara. He wrote Appointment in Samara, and he was very popular back in the 30s and 40s, and he was very hard-boiled and an alcoholic, and everybody hated him. But he was considered, I consider him an absolutely brilliant writer, so definitely him. Evelyn Waugh, because he was like the funniest writer ever. And the third writer, I certainly wouldn't want Shakespeare there. Moliere. I would love to really figure out what Moliere was like. To me, forget about Shakespeare. Read Moliere. He's the best. So.
Any live ones, Bob?
No, oddly enough, I don't read modern fiction, contemporary fiction, and so no, don't like living writers. Don't need the competition. They don't need any more attention. No, absolutely not.
Got it.
I get to end, and then Huff is going to start the general discussion of all of it. He's going to lead off with a good question, but I have the next. Bob, describe your ideal reading experience. When, where, what, and how? How do you like to read? In what environment?
I do it every night. I do it every night. I watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, as we all do. And then I take the dog for a walk, and then I come back, and it's still pretty early, like 7:15 or something, and time for bed. And I have a couple of tokes of my medical marijuana, and grab a book and hop in bed, and in the comfort of my own room, in the quiet of the evening, with the dog lying at the foot of the bed, to me, that's heaven. That is absolutely heaven. I love
Perfect answer. Now, do you go to sleep with the book on your chest?
Sometimes, or increasingly, yes.
Yes. Well, I also want to tell everybody the reason I asked that. When Bob and I were chatting before, I knew I was going to get macular degeneration. So about 6-7 years ago, I started to listening to books. And Bob, as a matter of fact, is going to, I don't know when it's coming out, Bob, but he's going to have a version of his own novel that he is reading.
Yes, I just recorded the audiobook, and it'll be coming out in about a month or so. So
it's good for us old people. I go to bed listening.
And I've never done that. I've never done that.
You would enjoy it.
I've never listened to a book.
You would enjoy some of the readers. There's some people that are really, as I asked you whether you could imitate some of your characters, there's some people that have real talent. So my next question is, what moves you the most in a work of literature?
To me, the whole, what makes literature work for me personally is the sense of longing involved in the literature. You know, so a good book or a good movie, you see what the main character is longing for, and will he or she get that, and why is it important to him or her? And so the wisest advice I ever got about writing was from a screenwriter named Kurt Ludke, who wrote out of Africa, and he said, it's so simple: show the longing. And I think that's so true. So when you all are writing your novels, show the longing. That makes it work.
Great. We're going to begin. I know a lot of you are going to have questions, so we ask you all to use that hand raising function. And if you don't know how to use it under reactions, you can wave your hand and we'll try. I've got a lot of help here. we'll try to catch you so Bob doesn't get inundated. But Huff has an excellent question to start off our group discussion.
Even back in high school, you had a gift for real satire with an edge. Your fast and your great articulation allows you to come across without malice. I was just wondering, having lived a life with satire, if you've ever gotten into trouble by stepping too far in terms of any lawsuits or any problems with your publishers or with people that you have run into.
Remarkably little, and I kept expecting something bad to happen sometimes, particularly when I wrote a gossip column in a small town for 40 years, and I tried not to make enemies except with politicians. I would pick fights with politicians, and I love doing it. And you're supposed to do that. I mean, I think it's like in the Constitution or something. Writers are supposed to attack politicians. The smart politicians would try and get in on the joke and become your friends, and the dumb politicians would try and get you fired. And this happened 2 or 3 times, and every time I won. Every time I outsmarted the dumb politicians. The lesson here is, if you're going into politics, don't fuck with the press. It's not gonna, ultimately it's not gonna work, although Trump seems to be doing a beautiful job.
Were there any times when you felt that you were just a little over the edge and had situations where, although you didn't get sued, you were a little bit uncomfortable? Yes,
the thing, and they bothered me a little. Things like writing about neighborhoods and calling them tacky. That in retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. I should have found another way to communicate what they were like rather than insulting them because they were poor. That's not good. I have made that mistake. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, and we'll open it up to questions. Did Jim Lindheim, did you have your hand up first, or did you put? You have to unmute.
I don't know if I was first, but I put up my hand. So, Bob, are you writing now? Are you doing any writing?
Yes, I'm actually doing a lot of writing. The Love Junkie, which I'm selling already, is coming out in May. An unpublished novel is coming out also.
Oh, good. So, something that you wrote a while ago, or that you wrote?
Yes, something that I wrote a while ago, and it is so bizarre that nobody would publish it. And now, finally, after all the good publicity, it is being published.
That's great.
And I'm maybe a third of the way through another novel, and it's going to be my last. I'm summing up everything I have to say about life in this one last novel.
Have you ever written short stories?
I can't do it. It's funny. Every writer's a little different about where their talent lies, and mine does not lie in screenplays, plays, or short stories. The only thing I can really do effectively is a novel. Do not ask me why, but that's just the way it works.
Oh, great. Good luck with the new one.
Thank you.
John Vipon.
I think I'm unmuted. Hello,
Yes.
Bob.
Hi.
I wish I had known you better in college. I remember we shared some classroom experiences together, and you were smart and also almost as funny then as you are now. And I very much enjoyed the Warren Harding book. I discussed it a little bit with Jim Lindheim, who's my superior intellectually, all of our superiors intellectually, and as a writer. So I value his opinion highly, and yours. But first, I want you to know that as I read your novel as a gay man in the 1980s, I tried to put myself back in that frame of reference. It's hard to do 40 years ago, but I want you to know there's plenty of us healthy gays continuing on in our lives and doing ordinary and sometimes reasonably good things. So welcome to our class. And I hope you will join us as we age in some reunion so we get to see you. and I mean that very seriously. I do differ on in one respect when you said you didn't think Williams supported those in the arts. I think there were many of us who, in small ways, I mean, I painted with Lee Hershey my senior year and enjoyed him very much. And I think you don't give enough credit to yourself. You won the Hutchinson Prize, which I learned belatedly, and you should be very proud of that. And we're very proud of you. So just tell me a little bit about the Warren Harding book. I've seen it written as or written about as a novel by a gay writer or a gay novel. I think it's a very funny novel, perhaps by a gay writer. How did that inform you then, and how do you look back on it now? It is a different world, and thank God it is.
Well, when I wrote it in the early 1980s, gay novels were not taken seriously. They did exist, but they were considered very outre and kind of embarrassing, and you know, not at all taken seriously. And to a certain degree, the character in Warren Harding is closeted. I mean, not to a certain degree, he is. And I tried to make it as subtle as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, I made it so subtle that nobody got it the first time around. But this time they did. And as I'm sure you know, the book that changed all of that was a book called Dancer from the Dance by Andrew Holleran, who suddenly made gay novels respectable. I could write a book about being gay, but I'm not going to.
No.
It's been a long haul, and then there was AIDS. Our lives were dominated by AIDS for a long period of time. My lover of 20 years died of AIDS. So we have been through the mill. But and I'm one of the few guys from those days in the 80s, the late 70s and 80s in New York who's still alive. One of the few. And not much is known about that period because everybody who lived through it is dead. It's not been documented properly. And it was an amazing time to live. Anyway. So
well, congratulations. You wrote a very funny novel. You're a delightful person. I look forward to getting to know you better. Thank you for being with us.
Well, my pleasure.
Lenny Spector, you have to unmute, Leonard. Do you know how to unmute?
There you go. So, Bob, everybody really wants to know, are you speaking to us from your trailer? And what brand do you recommend?
What brand of trailer?
What brand of trailer? Correct.
Kopp, K-O-P-F, is very, very good. Palm Harbor is very, very good. I know a lot about trailers, believe me, and it's a wonderful way to live. It's a wonderful way to live. I don't regret it at all. And you probably are living in one too. No, you became some famous lawyer, right? And I'm sure you made a fortune in public service.
Others wave the hand, or do I see any?
Actually, I was in public service and did not make a fortune as a lawyer, but I'm not yet in a trailer park, but we'll see.
Bob, what about Airstream trailers? What's wrong with them?
You can't really live in them. They're a little too small.
Okay.
They're for weekends and for camping. My trailer, I wish I could take you on a little tour. The living room is 22 by 15 with 9-foot ceilings. It's beautiful. Just beautiful. Now, when there's a hurricane, it's somewhat of a problem because it means you're going to die. But other than that,
Bob, I assume your trailer is on blocks, right?
I've never looked underneath it. I'm afraid.
You don't have wheels, is what I'm
No,
getting.
I know I don't have wheels.
I
don't know
a Gulf
I don't
Stream
know.
has wheels. This, yeah.
I don't know what's down there. I hear little noises sometimes. I don't want to know.
Oh, shoot.
Bob, did your wit and sense of humor help you carry you through the just tremendous tragedy of losing almost your life and your home?
No, I kind of went to pieces.
Did you?
You're talking about the hurricane?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was a very frightening experience because you're in a situation where you do not know what to do, and if you make the wrong decision, you may die. You know, the flood will come, and then there's nothing you can do, and there's no nobody's to ask. You know, there's the authority system, police, fire department, that kind of thing vanishes. You are totally on your own, and you've got to figure out how to survive. And it was 5 days, very tricky, very, very tricky.
Alan Stern. You have to unmute, Alan. You're muted. You're muted. He's got a new fancy system. See, Bob, he's got too many things to mess with.
Right.
Go ahead.
So let me see if I can see everybody here. Okay. So one question, Bob, has to do with the character in your novel, your Warren Harding novel, named Howard Kesselbaum, the psychiatrist. Yes. For those of us who went to school with Howie Kestenbaum, could you explain that? Was there any?
I chose his name. I often pick characters' names from people I went to school with, both high school and college, and I needed a brooding poet. Now I know Howie Kestenbaum was not a brooding poet, but he was a very, very intelligent. I mean, of course, we all remember Howie and what happened to him, and so that's how he ended up there. That's certainly not his personality, but I did steal his name, and in retrospect, I'm kind of glad I did because it's a little, memorial kind of thing.
And just to follow up the memorial thing, I was in New York City 3 weeks ago and went to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, which I'd never been to. And it's, for those of you who have not done that yet, I strongly recommend it. And what you have down there is a database of all the people who lost their lives, and you can click on a name, and not only will photos come up, but little write-ups or videos that the family has contributed. It's very, very moving. So I highly recommend that. My other question, unrelated, has to do with my favorite author from the 1970s, the author of the Travis McGee novels, which I just ate up. I love them. That was John D. MacDonald, who became a colleague of yours. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, he's actually one of the reasons I moved to Sarasota. I loved the picture he painted of Florida and the way it was full of crooks and people fleeing from one place or another and all ending up here because it was the end of the line. And he painted such a romantic picture of it that that's the reason I moved here. And I got to know him. There was a group of writers that had lunch every Friday, and they asked me to join, and John was there every week, and so we had lunch together. And he was an amazing person. He was exactly, sometimes you meet people that you admire, you're like heroes, and they turn out to be just awful. And he was exactly the way you wanted him to be. He was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person. We became good friends for a couple of years, and then unfortunately he died rather early. But if you all have not read him, do so, because he invented modern crime fiction. you know, all those people that write it and all those bestsellers. He's the guy who really invented that kind of writing.
Before I call on Ron, I've just a quick follow-up. Since he was a mentor, are you mentoring any young creative talents personally?
Well, I'm mentoring a very attractive young man.
Enough.
Enough. On to Bodenson. On to Bodenson. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Florida, and it seems to have intruded on the national consciousness in the last few decades, whether through politics or hurricanes. But it seems like before year 2000, none of us had heard of Florida. And then we had the election that went down to the hanging chads. You were in Florida at the time. Why? You must have a novel budding on the hanging chads or the personalities involved back in the day.
Well, funny you should mention that. You all very well may remember that there was a woman named Catherine Harris who was the Florida Secretary of State. And she was the person who certified the elections in the state. And we were very good friends. In fact, I put on a nightclub act as Mr. Chatterbox, and she was my assistant. She was the Vanna White character in my nightclub act. And that was the first time she'd ever been on a stage, the first time she'd ever been before an audience. And she really took to it. She took to it so well that she eventually went into politics because she was so good at it. And in the nightclub act, she and I did a chicken dance. Now, at weddings, you used to do chicken dances, and you go like that, and then you wiggle your butt and things like that. And we did this in the nightclub act. And then the election happened, and it dawned on the world that Catherine Harris was going to decide who the next president was going to be. And they did the hanging chads and all of that. And somehow people got wind of the fact that I had a videotape of Catherine in the nightclub act, and we're doing the chicken dance. You very well may remember that she was really vilified for her makeup and her general lack of seeming intelligence. And people who saw the tape of her doing the chicken dance, if that ever got out in public, she would have been crucified even more. And the press was after me for this. The National Enquirer offered me $50,000 for the tape. Wow. And I had to make a moral decision, and it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. Do I sell the tape for $50,000, or do I protect my friend and keep her from being further humiliated? And I really thought about that for a long time, and
So what'd you do with the 50,000?
Well, I didn't do it. I did not sell the tape. I still have, it's in my sock drawer. And so I don't know if that's swung the election in Bush's favor, but I've always felt a little guilty about that, you know, causing the Iraq war, and it's on my conscience. Oh, but wait, one more thing. So Catherine and I remained friends, and I was over there for dinner not too long ago, and guess who was there for dinner the night before? Sidney Powell.
Oh,
imagine
my God.
Catherine Harris and Sidney Powell having dinner together, and I missed it by one night.
Oh. Catch her before she goes to prison. She just pled guilty to that.
I know. I'm fascinated by her. I love scoundrels like that. They just fascinate me.
Go ahead.
I've read a lot of your Mr. Chatterboxes, and one of my favorite ones was banned books. do you have a favorite one that you sort of laugh about still, that really hit you? Because as I say, several of them were really very clever and fun to read, and I'm glad that we've had the opportunity to do it.
Well, I don't know if I have a favorite. I do like, people do like the banned books one, and it's if you all are interested, it's very easy to find online, and it's about books that I feel should be banned, and there's a whole little list of them, and there's one I wrote about the Pee Wee Herman scandal that's also very interesting, and the one about 9/11, because the president was in Sarasota on 9/11, and for some bizarre reason he invited me to accompany him on his education tour of Florida. Well, he should have. I mean, I got him the job as president. So I was with him in Sarasota the morning of September 11th, and was saw all that happen from his point of view. But what makes it even more fascinating is this is where the hijackers learned how to fly, and lived for a year while they were learning how to fly, and they hung out at the nudie bar down the street, and dated local women, and hung out with the Islamic community, and all that has been swept under the carpet. There's, all those intricate ties of what was going on while they were in Sarasota for a year has been. I've tried to do research on it to try and figure out what happened. You can't do it. It's all been hidden. I have no idea why. Well, I have some ideas why.
There is a link. There is a link that everybody should know at the end of Bob's little bio that Ellen provided. There's a link that will take you to Mr. Chatterbox, a number of them, and you can then go and keep going. For instance, I found the one you wrote on Santa Barbara, Bob, that isn't listed in them. They are really worth picking out ones you think you'd enjoy and reading, because you have a unique talent to capture. I especially like, Bob, the one that what is it? Where do you go to retire from Sarasota? Is that
right?
Yeah.
If you live in a retirement town, where do you go to retire?
Where do you go? It's just beautiful, beautiful. Other comments or questions? Harry, I'm surprised. Harry Matthews, I'm surprised at you with all your writing. You'd have to unmute, but go ahead. Wally, go ahead, unmute.
Well, Bob, I have a question, but it actually leads to another one about your research. But you mentioned the tape you have in your sock drawer. You aren't afraid of Eliot or somebody like him going in to steal it?
Well, now I am. I'm trying.
Anyway, I actually just want to thank you for coming on. I didn't know you very well, Williams, and I never would have read your book without this, but I was fascinated.
Thank you.
I could think Eliot was wonderful and horrible.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think you developed him pretty damn well.
Thank you.
Well, Wally, I got him on because Bob is letting me get some royalties from all the books you guys buy.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Harry, you're unmuted now. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, actually, I was sort of at the butt end of the publishing business. I got to read all the manuscripts, and when I did publish some short stories, but they're all porn, so I can't recommend them to you. I don't know how well they'd hold up. I can fill in a couple of details from my reunion days. Bill Henderson, I know, spent a number of years in Chicago running a puppet theater. So he continued his Warren G. Harding, by the way, is quite well known to those of us from Ohio. He's one of the 8 Ohio presidents. He's one of the 4 who demonstrated a tremendous gift for dying in office.
That's very important.
Yes, including the Williams connection with James Garfield. And Alan mentioned the registration at the World Trade Center. That's also available online at the 911 Museum website. But otherwise, I've just enjoyed the chat. I mean, one of the reasons I left the publishing industry was that it became very corporate and people started referring to books as products. And, I was just as happy to be squeezed out. And I just went on with the verbal arts then as a tour guide.
Yeah, it's not what it was.
No. But I do, yes. You mentioned, gay literature. There were a number of interesting gay plays. Well, everyone knows Angels in America, of course. And what I think is the most admirable thing about it is that unlike almost every other AIDS play, no one dies except Roy Cohn. And you knew that. You knew he was going to die when you walked in the theater. And also Jeffrey, I'm trying to think, it's the title of a play. Paul Rudnick, yes. I thought that was a very good,
Yes,
well, it's a comedy about AIDS, if you can imagine such a thing.
As far as I can tell, I'm late, so somebody has to admit you.
Okay, let's see.
Yes.
We've got somebody that's not muted. I was going to follow up, speaking about publishing, but Bob, do you get?
Larry, Peter Watson raised his hand.
Oh, so a quick question before you do, Peter. How are you able to take critics don't look kindly to your writing? How does it affect you emotionally and intellectually?
It used to bother me tremendously because I was thinking, what am I doing wrong that they don't get it? Now I realize that the way I write, a certain percentage of people have to hate it for it to work. That's a very important part of the process, is me getting bad reviews. So it doesn't bother me anymore at all. I kind of enjoy them because they're such idiots and they're so stupid.
Harry?
Bob,
Harry?
unmute. Going back to your early life, which was in Cuba, and your departure from Cuba, is there a story there that could go with Cuba and your flight and all that went into that?
There is, and actually it's a wonderful, wonderful story, and you can find it online. It was in Sarasota Magazine. And if you Google Sarasota Magazine and the title Havana 1960, you will find the story of my escape from Cuba and what the Cuban Revolution was like. So I very highly recommend that. Havana 1960.
Got it. Thank you.
Magazine.
Peter Watson, unmute yourself. Go ahead. You're muted, Peter. Peter?
Just a second.
There you go.
No. Muted again.
No, you're muted again. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. As excuse me, is the person scheduled to speak next month? And as a Cap and Bells alum, I've got to thank you for your wonderful presentation. It was a terrific experience. And all I can say is you're going to be a very, very tough act to follow. So,
but look at this way.
Thank you.
Look at this. He learned to unmute. You can too, Peter. You'll be fine.
I'm going to work on it.
Peter, we're really looking forward to you next month. It's on the 16th. And it's really going to be a great conversation, and we're looking forward to it. So, Bob, you're doing a great job tonight, and I know Peter, you will on the 16th as well.
Is there any last thoughts? I just want to say with some heartfelt emotion, Bob, your presence and your humbleness and your ability to share your talent with us, it just makes all this worthwhile. So thank you so much.
Here, here.
Well, thank you. And I'm delighted that we all got back in touch. I realize I've been very, very distant from the class. What can I say? I'm an introverted writer at heart. So, but from now on, I'll join in. Okay.
Well, you got people like John Vipon that everybody else in the class is brighter than he is, according to John. So you'll have to join us to help.
Well, there were a lot of us that were the 10%ers, though, Larry.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. So
Well,
I think
50%.
unless anybody has one pressing thing they want to find out, we don't want to promote someone, but the novel is well worth reading. And Mr. Chatterbox, if you just look at a few to see what is just fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining us. And Bob, can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Bob.
Nice to see you again, too.
Okay.
And thank Bester. Thanks for joining us.
Bester, thanks for joining us. Right. Nice to see you again.
Yes. Good to see you, Bester.
Bester, good to see you, Bester.
Good evening.
So long.